Very good morning to all of you. Today I am going to discuss a very important topic, that is management of shock and vascular access. First of all, the definition. What is shock? So shock can be defined as a state in which there is a profound and widespread reduction of the effective tissue perfusion, leading first to a reversible and, if prolonged, to an irreversible cellular injury. Coming to the clinical features, there are a variety of varied clinical presentation. It presents with various systemic manifestations, starting from the central nervous system. The patient may present with altered consciousness, restlessness, or irritability. The skin or surface areas may appear pale or bluish. There will be cool or moist skin. Excessive thirst will be there. There will be rapid and weak pulse patient. Patient may have rapid breathing and may also complain of nausea and vomiting. This is a general classification of the shock, mainly categorized under four headings. That is hypovolemic shock, which is due to the loss of volume of the body fluid compartments. Second is the cardiogenic shock, due to the involvement of the heart. And third is obstructive shock, which can again be divided into diastolic or systolic shock. The fourth one is an important variety, that is the distributive shock. Under this comes the sepsis, that is the shock due to the infection, and anaphylaxis due to hypersensitivity reaction. Coming to the first part, which I will be discussing today, is the hemorrhagic shock. We have always, all of us must have seen this triangle of death. So all patients of shock, or especially hemorrhagic shock, you should look for these three factors. Number one, hypothermia, coagulopathy, and acidosis. All three factors are interdependent. One factor leads to the development of other. So that's why it is important to break this vicious cycle of the triangle of the death. Now these are the various factors and the pathophysiology of how shock can lead to these effects. Actually, what happens? There are certain iatrogenic factors which lead to cold infusion, large amount of volume infusion due to the cold crystallite infusion. That leads to hemodilution, hypothermia, and non-anemic acidosis. These factors lead to the presentation of the sympathoadrenal response, genetic response, tissue injury and hypoperfusion, and certain local hemostasis factor. Coming to the grades of shock, there are mainly four grades of the shock: grade 1, 2, 3, and 4. On the basis of loss or percentage of the blood loss, if there is a 15% or less than 15% blood loss, then it is defined as the class 1 shock. 15 to 30% is labeled as class 2, and 30 to 40% loss is class 3, while more than 40% is taken as grade 4 or class 4 shock. If you all of you can see that if the heartbeat is less than 100 per minute and there is no increase or decrease in the blood pressure and no increase in the pulse rate, then it is defined as class 1 shock. While in class 2 shock, their pulse pressure would be decreased a little bit narrow, while the blood pressure is still normal. While in class 3 is the first class where the blood pressure is decreased. So if you are getting any kind of hypotension, then it's automatically labeled as class 3. You can also see that there is marked tachycardia in class 2 and class 3. There is no tachycardia or no increase in the pulse rate in class 1 shock. While class 4, there is important signs that are confusion and lethargy. These are the important signs which you can elicit. Coming to the laboratory investigations, all patients of hemorrhagic shock, you should always go for arterial blood gas sampling to look for any kind of hemodynamic or metabolic derangements. Hemoglobin and hematocrit should be evaluated so as to decide whether blood transfusion should be done or any kind of fluid is enough. Coagulation studies should be done to assess any kind of hemodilation and coagulation abnormalities which are very common in these patients. Again, electrolyte abnormalities, a certain radiologic investigation can also be done. Now these are the various sites of bleeding and the diagnostic modalities. If you have a chest injury, then chest radiography, thoracostomy tube and chest CT scans are important diagnostic modalities. In abdomen, the FAST is an important one apart from the physical examination, and then finally gold standard is CT scan and peritoneal lavage. Retroperitoneal injuries can be diagnosed with the help of CT scan and angiography, while long bones can be by the help of physical examination and plain radiography. Coming to the initial management, ABC is the protocol which all of us should follow in any kind of resuscitation efforts. The first measures to stop the bleeding should be taken. Initial fluids in the form of crystalloid should be given. There is always a debate whether early crystalloid versus delayed crystalloid or large versus volume, and also crystalloid versus colloid. So I'm not going to debate of these controversies, but you must know that the initial phases or when you require when you look into the available factor, then crystalloid is a bit of fluid of choice. Blood transfusion should be done if the indications are there, and always take care of the blood temperature of the patient, because hypothermia is a very important part of the triangular test. Now these are the various, this is the article published in 2018, the New England Journal of Medicine. It defines actually the level of care, what are the factors, what are the things you have to do in the pre-hospital care, and what are the things you have to do in the hospital level of care in these patients. If you look at these, the pre-hospital care is the primary prevention and education that, like, the public should be made aware what are the causes and how you can prevent these kind of bleeding or hemorrhage. While in the pre-hospital intervention, compressible site, junctional site, all the paramedic staff must know that how to stop the bleeding. This should be the priority. That is, hemorrhagic identification and control should be the priority. Limited resuscitation, hypothermia prevention, and rapid transport to the medical facility should be the goals of these patients, this level of care. Coming to the hospital, rapid identification of hemorrhagic shock, quick fast examination to determine the source of bleeding, laboratory workup, immediate resuscitation of the patient from the shock, and early massive transfusion protocol should be activated. Then coming to the second part, that is definitive hemostasis, that rapid control all sites of hemorrhage like surgical exploration, angiographic embolization, or any kind of endoscopic intervention. Now coming to the goals, how can you know that you have achieved a particular level of resuscitation? So actually goals are divided into early resuscitation and late resuscitation. While the bleed is still going on, it is called as early resuscitation, and when the bleeding has been controlled, it is called as late resuscitation. This is the list. I cannot go into the detail, but the main important thing, the systolic blood pressure should be 80 to 100 mm of Hg, while keeping the hematocrit target between 25 to 30%. A platelet count greater than 50,000 is the norm. The important differences in the late resuscitation is the systolic blood pressure level has been made a little bit higher, that is more than 100, which was 80 to 100 in the initial or early resuscitation. While other abnormalities are, while other values are almost more or less similar, the only thing is you have to normalize all the factors or all the various coagulation, electrolyte, or body temperature, etc. Coming to the end point of resuscitation, there are four points of resuscitation. If you achieve the cardiac index of 3 liter per minute per meter square, if you achieve a systemic oxygen delivery of more than 500 ml per minute per meter square, or there is an adequate oxygen uptake of more than 100 ml per minute per meter square. And the lastly, if you can get the arterial lactate less than 2 millimolar per liter or base deficit of less than more than minus 2 millimolar per liter with a map of more than 60 and CEP of more than 8 centimeter of water, then these a patient has to be said that they have achieved an endpoint of resuscitation. Coming to the algorithm of use of resuscitators, if there is a shock and CP less than 12, immediately give IV fluids. If it is not less than 12 or it is more than 12, then you have to start vasopressors, that is norepinephrine. If on norepinephrine you have got the or you have achieved the map of more than 65 with a dose of less than 1 mic per kg per minute, then it is called as you can have bomb shock. If you have not achieved, then it is labeled as refractive shock, and you have to look for all the reversible causes like hypovolemia, hypocortisol, acidosis, and if it is corrected, then add epinephrine. Now coming to the warm and cold concept. If there is low systemic vascular resistance, then or there is a severe vasodilatation, then it is called as warm shock. If the cardiac output is low while there is no decrease in systemic vascular resistance, then it is called as cold shock. Actually, in cold shock, you have to increase the inotropic action by adding the dobutamine. While in low systemic vascular resistance or there is a vasodilatation, then vasopressin is the drug of choice. DCR. This is an important concept that is also called as damage control resuscitation. This is a concept where you resuscitate up to a level where you avoid severe manipulation of anatomy and physiology. What you want to achieve that you want to achieve the resuscitation with minimal manipulation of the hemodynamic status. The main targets are avoid and correct hypothermia, apply directly, delay fluid under the time of definitive hemostasis in selected patients, minimize steroid infusion, and use massive transfusion protocol. Avoid delay in definitive surgical endoscopic angiographic hemostasis, minimize imbalances in plasma, obtain functional laboratory measures of coagulation, and selectively administer pharmacological agents to address persistent coagulopathy. Coming to the monitoring part, important, this is a list of non-invasive and invasive monitoring. I'm not going to derail of these things. Coming to the assessment of volume, this is an important concept, whether you want to know whether the patient has adequate volume in the intravascular compartment or not. So there are various parameters. This is again a very dilemma. There is a lot of dilemma and there are lots of debates over this issue. Which parameter is best? But no single parameter. Remember, no single parameter is best. You have to use a group of parameters to label a patient's volume status. Basically, it can be classified into two, that is static and dynamic. The static parameters are central venous pressure, pulmonary artery occlusion pressure, right ventricular and diastolic volume, left ventricular and diastolic artery pressure, global and diastolic volume, etc. While the dynamic one are systolic volume variation, pulse pressure variation, stroke volume variation, systolic pressure variation, IVC collapse, and leg raising test. Thank you. Today I am going to the second lecture in the series of shock management. Next, coming to the cardiogenic shock. This is again a very important shock after the hemorrhagic part. Now, how can we define the cardiogenic shock? So it is defined as a sustained hypotension, that is systolic blood pressure of less than 90 mmHg for at least 30 minutes. You can have reduced cardiac index, that is less than 2.2 liter per minute per meter square, in the presence of elevated pulmonary capillary occlusion pressure of more than 15 mmHg. Pulmonary capillary occlusion pressure is also called as pulmonary bed pressure, that is the pressure on the left atrial side. What are the therapeutic options you have? You can have general measures, you have inotrope, you have intra-aortic balloon pump, and you have deperfusion vascularization. So these are the important uh, therapeutic options. Now coming to the part how the American Heart Association or what are the American College of Cardiology guidelines for PCI in patients with cardiogenic shock. So grade A recommendations are that the primary PCI is recommended for patients less than 75 years with ST deviation or left bundle branch block or who develop shock within 36 hours or MI and are suitable for revascularization that can be performed within 18 hours of shock. And the second indication is the primary PCI is reasonable for selected patients 75 years or old with ST deviation or LVB or who develop shock within 36 MI and are suitable for revascularization that can perform within 18 hours of shock. So basically, the patient should be less than 75 years for an grade A recommendation or 75 years old or 75 years for level grade B recommendations. Right? So if you have a patient of less than 75 years with ST elevation or left bundle block with shock within 36 hours are suitable for revascularization. Thank you.